in my world, in my system at the True Purpose Institute, we actually deal with 4 different types of purpose statements. So, as I said earlier, to me, purpose is the answer to the question, why are you here? Why do you exist? That's what purpose means. But there's more than one way of answering that question. And so we actually teach 4 different ways. And I know other schools that have up to a dozen different types of purpose statements they create, some of which I don't consider to be purpose, something like values or vision, which to me are another animal. Um, so one type of purpose statement is a mission. And that question is the answer to the question of how are you meant to change the world? If you fulfilled your purpose in life before you died, how would the world be different as a result? And therefore, it's phrased as an objective, not like a business mission, which is a repeatable thing, but like a nonprofit mission, like save the whales. That's an objective. Or a military mission, right? Take that hill. That's an objective. Once it's done, it's done. Check, complete, finished. So when there's no war on earth, mission complete. When there are no gangs in your city, mission complete. Whatever that is, that highest level objective that's part of your purpose, to us, that's your mission. The other 3, so the one that's repeatable, which is the guiding leaders to create heaven on earth, that's something we call a blessing. And a blessing is where I do something to you that is purposeful for me to do to you, and presumably purposeful for you to have done to you to receive, right? So I bless you, I transform you in some way. I show you the way. That was my original blessing, right? Showing people the way. I guide a leader to create heaven on earth. That's another blessing that I can give. That was actually my second one that I learned. So you learn, and you've been trained to do this since birth unconsciously and have done it many times, but don't know it about yourself until you do. So that's the repeatable part. It's a process you do. That's number 2. Number 3 is something called essence. And that's the being state of your purpose. So we do our purpose, but we also are our purpose. So when you are being your purpose, what are you being? That's your essence. And the 4th one is message, which actually got added by the certified True Purpose coaches after the book True Purpose was published, although it is written in there about message. Your message is what you were sent to tell the rest of us. What is it that is the most purposeful thing you could communicate to the other human beings here on this planet? That's your message. So if you're dealing with someone who's done the true purpose process and you ask them their purpose, you could get up to 4 different answers.
Hello, everybody. My name is Zenka Caro. I'm founder of LightNet, and my purpose is to make the impossible possible. I have a very special guest for us today. His name is Tim Kelley, and he has affected my life in profound ways regarding my own purpose. He started out in MIT with a BS in mathematics, but he went on to found a company called the True Purpose Institute, which has developed a remarkable and unique way to help people find the life that they were meant to live. He has taught over 1,000 other coaches, trainers, and therapists his method and takes it out into the world to help people change their life and direct it in the most incredible ways. He has also taught leaders in companies such as PricewaterhouseCoopers, Nabisco, Alibaba, Inc., you name it, and also heads of states. And he is even working with countries themselves to help them bring about purpose and a story and a meaning to lead their countries. He also helps canceled leaders find their new stories. So he has also written several books. One is called True Purpose 12 Strategies for Discovering the Difference You Are Meant to Make. It is a true honor to welcome such an original thinker who's had such a massive impact in the world today.
In my world, my purpose has a couple of different ways of stating it. So I'll say a few of them. Um, so the way I say it most often publicly is I guide leaders to create heaven on earth. And What I mean by that is that there are certain leaders who are called to change the world and create a new and better world. And it's my job to show them how to do that effectively. And by heaven on earth, I don't mean that as a purely religious term, although a religious person is free to interpret it in a religious way. I like that term. Martin Root, my buddy, the founder of Project Heaven on Earth, uses it a lot. And what's lovely about that term is it really sets a high standard for what that new and better world has to look like. Like a lot of people say, create a world that works for everyone. That's great. Heaven on earth, higher bar. I like the high bar. So that's the most common way I say it. Another way of saying the same thing would be to transform society into its divine form. Um, Basically synonymous with creating heaven on earth. So a world that works for all speaks to the win-lose feature of how society is currently structured, right? That in sports, in business, in government, everything's oriented around win-lose. And now we have some rules, some guidelines in place to try to prevent certain groups from getting utterly screwed, but the whole thing's a competition for resources, money, land, whatever. A world that works for everyone sort of flips that on its head in a useful way, saying, well, if these people are having a terrible time and these people are having a great time, then we haven't succeeded. We're not done yet. And I like that. And I actually teach non hierarchical governance methods to companies and other organizations to help them make better decisions that serve all of their stakeholders instead of trying to take from some stakeholders to give to others. So that's how I view a world that works for everyone. Heaven on earth means what's the best world that you could possibly imagine, and let's go for something slightly better than that, which would include a world that works for everyone, but not limited to. In order to qualify as heaven on earth, it would have to have a lot of other interesting features beyond just working for everyone. So I was finding various people's purposes for several years. This was 20 years ago, after finding my own and realizing that it was purposeful for me to help other people find their purpose. And along the way, I received the instruction, okay, now only do it for leaders. And after sort of gulp and focusing on leaders and doing that for a while, then I received the instruction, okay, now focus on world leaders. That was, I don't know, some 5 or 8 years ago that I got that instruction. Um, and the language helping, or excuse me, guiding leaders to create heaven on earth came out of me trying to figure out how to articulate my purpose, which I understood very well internally, in ways that others could understand. That's where that language came from. But the focus on leaders has been around for a while. That's been more than 15 years that I've really focused on helping leaders find their purpose and helping organizations find their purpose. And since maybe 2014, I don't remember exactly, helping countries find their purpose as well. So, to enact this, I founded something called the True Purpose Institute. This was, I'd been teaching workshops about purpose for years. Very early on, started training coaches and consultants to find other people's purpose. And then other people showed up who wanted to teach. And so we now have a bunch of people teaching this work all around the world, helping thousands and thousands of people find their purpose and training thousands of coaches, consultants, and therapists to find others' purpose. And that's actually our focus. Like we really focused in on, rather than holding lots and lots of public workshops to help lots of people find their purpose, training people to find others' purpose. That's been our focus at the True Purpose Institute. And so we've got teachers in South America and teachers in North America. We've had people teach in Israel. We've had workshops in China and Japan, um, in Europe, in the Netherlands in particular. With people all over the place, in the process of learning to find the purpose of organizations, learning to work with groups, learning to teach workshops, learning to train others how to find people's purpose. Right now, we're actually in the middle of a survey to try to figure out how many people's purposes we've found, because we don't know. we know how many people we've trained, but we don't know how many people they've found the purposes of. So we're actually like this week doing a survey to try to total up the numbers and figure out as best we can how many people, all the thousands that we have trained, how many people's purposes they've found. So for a country finding their purpose, why would they want to do that? Well, let me say there's kind of two answers to that question. Why would we as citizens want countries to have purposes? Let me answer that question first. I actually did a TEDx talk about this called Why Countries Behave Like Children. You can go look it up. Um, so if you listen to how the leaders of countries talk about why they do what they do, you'll hear language like looking out for our national interests. Or protecting our citizenry or this sort of thing. It's very defensive, low level Maslow's hierarchy stuff. It's not very aspirational. So it's kind of like a bunch of 2-year-olds squabbling in a playground with no parents around, right, fighting over stuff. um, I submit that the world would be better off if countries behaved more like adults and less like children, but not just adults in general, psychologically healthy adults. And the same is true of large corporations, right? It'd be better if they were behaving like psychologically healthy adults. A person who is only concerned with their own welfare and doesn't care about anyone else is a sociopath. And that is not a psychologically healthy adult. And that's the language that large corporations and countries use, right? That it's pure self interest and nothing else. There are economists who claim that that's good for the world. I would argue there's plenty of empirical evidence that they're wrong. So if we think purpose is so good for people and so good for companies, why wouldn't we want countries to be purpose driven as well? And rather than just trying to guard their borders and protect their interests and have their spies get information they need and all that other kind of stuff that countries do, which they would no doubt continue to do, to ask themselves the question, why is the world a better place because we're here? And how can we make the world even better? That's why I think we should want countries to find their purpose. Why would an individual country want to find its purpose? For the same reason that a person or a company does. And in my view, there's two reasons why people or organizations or countries want to find their purpose. One is aspiration. That is to say, I have a desire to do more and be more. Maybe I love working on myself, right? Some of this audience listening right now, y'all are growth and development junkies. You know who I'm talking to, right? You love taking workshops, you love reading books, you love learning and growing and becoming a better version of yourself. Well, purpose is a great tool for doing that. So maybe a country wants to do that. And an example of that is Bhutan. They don't have a national purpose per se, but they do have a national happiness project. Can we increase the happiness level of our population? That's a goal of theirs. That's a very good goal. It's sort of bordering on a purpose, right? That's aspirational. The other reason why individuals or companies or countries want to find their purpose beyond just wanting to be more and do more and be all that they can be is desperation. They have a problem and they believe that purpose will help them solve that problem. And that's the more common case. So, an example for an individual would be my spouse died, and now my life is suddenly feels empty and meaningless, and I want to fill that void. Or maybe I'm a mother and my kid moved away to college, and I've really identified as a mother, and now I don't know what to do with myself. Or maybe I just got out of prison, or maybe I just got cured from some life threatening disease that's been obscuring my view of the world for years. And now suddenly I'm free and I have to figure out what to do, right? All of those are motivations why I would want to find my purpose to solve a problem, to meet a need in my life. Well, the same can be true of an organization, and the same can be true of a country. So the two countries I've worked with so far unofficially, I look forward to doing it officially, are Colombia, right after they signed the peace agreement with the narco terrorists and ended years of conflict in Colombia. That raised the question, well, what now? Who are we as a country, and what are we doing if we're not fighting these narco terrorists in the jungle, right? The FARC and the Medellin cartel and all those guys. The other country I worked on was Israel, and I would love to make that project official because they really need it. And I was making progress with the government to try to get an official project approved when the war broke out. So it's a little bit on pause right now. But right after the current war ends, I argue, would be a great time for Israel to want to find its purpose because they do not have a plan. They do not know what to do with the Palestinians. They do not have a vision for themselves as a country in the future being better than they are now. They're so focused on survival, they cannot think about the future. And being unable to think about the future, they are not going to be able to solve their national problems. I would assume that somewhere around 3 to 5% of people know their purpose. I hear you saying it's 10. I believe you. Now, an interesting question is when you ask someone, do you know your purpose? They might say yes. And then if you ask them to tell you what it is, they might go, and then talk for 3 minutes, right? So, does that person know their purpose? That's an interesting question. If they can't articulate it, maybe they know it. Maybe they have a felt sense of purpose. Is that enough to say, yes, I know my purpose? So, I bet you could get 10% of people to answer the question, do you know your purpose, with a yes? But I seriously doubt that 10% of human beings could give you a clear answer when you ask them what their purpose is. So I just submit that first of all. Why do so few people know their purpose? It's actually really hard to find your purpose, right? I would imagine that in an indigenous culture where people were really living more in harmony with nature, a higher percentage of people would answer yes to those questions. I believe that. I have no evidence for that belief whatsoever. But why is it that we don't know our purpose? If you ask someone, what is your purpose? You're in effect asking them, why are you here? Why do you exist? That's what that question means. At least that's what it means to me. Well, NLP trained people, which I am not, will tell you that the brain does very bad things when you ask it why questions. It creates this like vapor lock. So, being able to answer the question, why are you here, well and articulately, is actually fairly rare because the brain doesn't produce useful information when you ask the person that question. Now, there's a very small percentage of people who know their purpose from when they can walk. But it's way less than 10%. It's probably less than 1%. These are like prodigies. And if you ask them when they're 3 years old and you ask them when they're 90, they'll give you the same answer, but that's quite rare. The rest of us thrash and flail around trying to figure it out or ignore the question altogether. It's not true that everyone needs to know their purpose. And this is something a lot of people who do what I do for a living, who write about purpose and speak about purpose and find many, many people's purposes, would disagree with me and say everyone has to find their purpose. That's projection, right? The fact that I need to find my purpose does not mean that you need to find yours. An interesting question to ask yourself is, why would a person need to know their purpose at all? And the answer is because purpose is a very useful tool for meeting certain needs. High level Maslow's hierarchy needs like self actualization and self transcendence, the two top layers of Maslow's hierarchy. That later one he added, the self transcendence added before his death later in life. Purpose is very good at solving problems at those tippy top bit of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but not so useful. It's helpful, but not super useful with the lower stuff, but really good at the top stuff. If someone doesn't have an unmet high-level Maslow's hierarchy need that they're concerned about, their motive for finding their purpose will be low. And let me give you a simple example of that. Let's take a hypothetical farmer who loves farming, and he's got a family, and his family is happy, and his kids are going to school, and everybody's healthy, and it's all great. And every day he goes out and looks at his farm and says, I have died and gone to heaven. I love farming so much. If you go offer that guy an opportunity to find his purpose and you're willing to pay for it, he will say no. Why? He doesn't need it. Purpose is there to help people lead fulfilling and meaningful lives. And if they already are leading fulfilling and meaningful lives, they will be uninterested, and they will be right to be uninterested. It's easy to confuse purpose with profession, but a purpose could be manifested through multiple different professions. I'll give an example in a minute. And three different people in the same profession could be manifesting three different purposes through that same profession. A profession is a set of skills and activities. A purpose is a why, right? So it doesn't follow that there's a one-to-one correlation between purposes and professions. There isn't. It's a many-to-many relationship. So with myself, for example, the purpose I discovered when I discovered my purpose was to show people the way, right? That was the original purpose statement that I learned. Initially in a dream, which I wrote about in my book, True Purpose, and then later by other means, which we can talk about. Um, I, as a when I was in college, I studied orienteering, which is basically running around the woods with a map and a compass, trying to figure out where you're going. Right? When I was in the Navy, I was an expert navigator. When I became a consultant, I focused on helping organizations find their vision and find their purpose. Right? All of those are different ways of helping people find their path, of showing them the way. I'm a Waze map editor. All of those are purposeful activities for me because they're all different ways of showing people the way. I give great driving directions, right? If you want to say, oh, I'm lost, I need to get to such and such place, I'm the guy you want to pull over and ask, right? All of those things are showing people the way. When I used to interview for MIT, students from certain schools who wanted to go to MIT, I was their interviewer. I would take that opportunity to counsel them about how to decide which school to go to, not just to see if they're a good candidate or not. All of those are ways of showing people the way. So all of those activities are purposeful and lead to completely different professions, but are all expressions of the same purpose. So the dream that I had where I initially learned my purpose was very short, and it's the only dream I've ever had where there were no visuals. So I'm asleep and it's pitch black, and I hear a booming voice say, "Your purpose is to help others find their path." And then I woke up. And that was the entire dream. And it lasted, a couple seconds tops, and I've never forgotten it, and I never will. And then I had to try to figure out what to do with that, which is, of course, a whole other problem with purpose. But that was the initial moment in which my purpose became clear to me. And I so didn't know what to do with it that I had to find that purpose again a couple of years later, another way, which is actually not uncommon. That when people learn their purpose, they so don't know what to do about it that they sort of put the genie back in the bottle and then it pops back up again later. The biggest problem I had once I really was clear on what my purpose was and what it meant, which happened later, um, really was fear, fear and resistance, and that is very common. If the purpose is very accurate, it will usually also be very intimidating. If you're really nervous about your purpose, frightened of it, don't want to tell anybody about it, it's almost certainly correct. um, and I just had like near panic at trying to figure out what to do about it because at the time I was a software developer. I was programming computers. And I was doing some coaching a little bit. Um, and it became clear to me that if I was going to live the purpose, by the way, the other purpose I received the second time I got my purpose, in addition to reclarifying that one, was a mission, which I consider to be another type of purpose, um, which was to transform business from a profit driven activity to a purpose driven activity. And that seemed wildly intimidating to me and ridiculous. Now this is 20 years ago. No one was talking about purpose in business. I was one of the first to be talking about purpose in business. Um, but I was terrified of people's reactions. I was terrified of how business people would react. I was terrified of how evangelical Christians would react. I was terrified of all sorts of things. And that's very normal to have a lot of fear, first about knowing the purpose, and then once the purpose is known, fear about living it and about doing it. And so it took me, the book True Purpose took me probably 2 years longer than it needed to publish it because of my fear and how difficult it was for me to focus on doing the steps to get the book out there. In my world, in my system at the True Purpose Institute, we actually deal with 4 different types of purpose statements. So, as I said earlier, to me, purpose is the answer to the question, why are you here? Why do you exist? That's what purpose means. But there's more than one way of answering that question. And so we actually teach 4 different ways. And I know other schools that have up to a dozen different types of purpose statements they create, some of which I don't consider to be purpose, something like values or vision, which to me are another animal. Um, so one type of purpose statement is a mission. And that question is the answer to the question of how are you meant to change the world? If you fulfilled your purpose in life before you died, how would the world be different as a result? And therefore, it's phrased as an objective, not like a business mission, which is a repeatable thing, but like a nonprofit mission, like save the whales. That's an objective. Or a military mission, right? Take that hill. That's an objective. Once it's done, it's done. Check, complete, finished. So when there's no war on earth, mission complete. When there are no gangs in your city, mission complete. Whatever that is, that highest level objective that's part of your purpose, to us, that's your mission. The other three, so the one that's repeatable, which is the guiding leaders to create heaven on earth, that's something we call a blessing. And a blessing is where I do something to you that is purposeful for me to do to you, and presumably purposeful for you to have done to you to receive, right? So I bless you, I transform you in some way. I show you the way. That was my original blessing, right? Showing people the way. I guide a leader to create heaven on earth. That's another blessing that I can give. That was actually my second one that I learned. So you learn, and you've been trained to do this since birth unconsciously and have done it many times, but don't know it about yourself until you do. So that's the repeatable part. It's a process you do. That's number two. Number three is something called essence. And that's the being state of your purpose. So we do our purpose, but we also are our purpose. So when you are being your purpose, what are you being? That's your essence. And the fourth one is message, which actually got added by the certified True Purpose coaches after the book True Purpose was published, although it is written in there about message. Your message is what you were sent to tell the rest of us. What is it that is the most purposeful thing you could communicate to the other human beings here on this planet? That's your message. So if you're dealing with someone who's done the true purpose process and you ask them their purpose, you could get up to 4 different answers to that question. So my advice if you're looking for your purpose is to get help. And the reason is that if you try to do it by yourself, it could take forever. You might never find it. Now, and that's a method I call ask and wait, which is what I did. And it took over 20 years for me to find my purpose. I don't recommend it. For some reason, people have an imagination that they ought to be able to find their own purpose on their own. They don't think that they should be able to perform brain surgery on themselves. They don't think that they know how to fly a plane or play a piano unless they're trained to do it. But for some reason, people have the imagination that they ought to be able to figure out their purpose with no training and no help whatsoever. And I have no idea why that is, but I'm here to tell you that's not how it works. Get qualified help. Get someone who really knows how to find people's purposes, and ideally someone who does that for a living to help you with yours. Just like if you needed brain surgery, you would find someone where that's what they do. That's how they pay their rent, is by doing brain surgery and doing it successfully over and over again. That's the person you want cutting into your brain, right? Why wouldn't you want someone qualified and skilled to help you find your purpose so you don't have to wait 20 years like I did? How do people find their purposes? So I talked about ask and wait, right? I talked about the people who know when they're two what their purpose is. For the rest of us who need to figure it out, who want help, there's basically 2 different types of methods that people use. The most common one, and I would say probably 99% of organized purpose work is done like this, is you get a list of questions and you answer all these questions. And they're things like, what would you do if you had a year to live? Or what would you do if you won the lottery or something like that? And different schools, different books, different coaches use different lists of questions, but they're all doing the same thing, which is they're sort of not quite asking you what your purpose is, but they're hitting right next to it. And if you answer a bunch of questions like that, a skilled person reading your answers or hearing your answers can pick up patterns in those answers and sort of ballpark roughly what your purpose might be. And that's how most purpose statements get created, is that way. It doesn't take a lot of time, usually an hour or two, plus your journaling time. And it works for almost everyone. The purpose statements, though, tend to be fairly short and a little bit vague and not super detailed and specific, which for most people is enough. Most human beings, that's as much purpose as they'll ever need. There's a subset of human beings, people who are called to change the world. And some of the folks listening are called to change the world, some of them are not. If you are called to change the world, that type of purpose statement will usually feel insufficient to you. You'll want more. And the reason is if you're called to change the world, a very detailed, specific purpose statement tells you how. It tells you which part of the world you're supposed to change and how you're supposed to do it. And a vague sentence fragment can't do that. You need more purpose information than that. If you're in that category, the other method, the preferred method, right, how I got it, both in my dream and later, is to have something that already knows your purpose explain it to you. Notice I said something, not someone. So, an interesting question for you is who or what in your universe should already know what your purpose is, even if you don't? And that could be a part of yourself, your heart, your gut, your intuition, your higher self, your true self, whatever term makes sense to you. This part of me should know my purpose, my soul, my spirit, your call, right? Or it could be something external. It could be something external and spiritual religious, like God or Jesus or the Holy Spirit or Allah or Buddha, right? Or the universe. Or it could be something completely non spiritual, right? Usually, if it's super non spiritual, it's internal. Could be a dead relative, could be your spirit animal if you're into Native American stuff, right? The question is based on your beliefs, nobody else's, not what anyone else tells you to believe, what you think you should believe, what you actually believe. Who or what already knows your purpose and could explain it to you if you asked. Living people don't count. And if you, and then so what we do at the True Purpose Institute is we teach people how to communicate with that thing, how to communicate with your dead grandmother or your heart or God, and have God tell you, this is your purpose. Glad you asked. And then we test it. We have 12 tests for telling whether it's a purpose or not. We have like 40 tests for telling whether it's really God talking or not, or the universe or whatever it is that you choose. Um, and so we can verify, yes, that really was your higher self talking. And yes, this really is your purpose. And then the question is, now what are you going to do with that? The reason why most people use the first set of methods is they're a lot easier and quicker. Actually, talking with something that knows your purpose is more effort and harder to do. You get way more information from it, but it takes more work to get it working. The biggest problem with that is fear, just like I said before, that in this case, fear of talking to it and learning your purpose. Most people aren't afraid of doing the usual methods and the usual exercise to find their purpose by the usual means. That brings up some nervousness, but not enough to derail the process. The prospect of having the Holy Spirit or your Buddha nature or your spirit guide tell you in no uncertain terms what your purpose is terrifies most people. And so, in that system, you have to do some method for clearing fears before that conversation is even possible. And there, by the way, there are people who already talk to stuff like things like this, but they don't talk about it very much because they've learned that if they tell people, oh, my guardian angel told me blah, 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 people will think they're nuts. So they've learned to keep their mouth shut about it. But there's a couple percent of people out there already doing this all the time. They're just quiet about it. So once you've got that communication channel working, you may even then still have fears of finding your purpose that prevent you from asking that question and getting a clear answer. So how do you let's assume that you've got the fears out of the way. How would you have that communication? And this could work if you're not talking about your purpose. You could just do this as an exercise today and get this to work. So let's say that the source you're going to use for this information is your inner truth. I'm just making that up. Okay. So now you're going to talk to your inner truth. What's the best way to do this? Well, you can do a guided visualization. You could close your eyes and go for a little walk in the imaginary woods and go have a chat in the clearing with your inner truth. Now, if no one's guiding that meditation, it may be a little difficult to do unless you have a lot of experience with meditation, but it might work. Um, the best method, the one that has the highest odds of success doing it completely on your own, is to do it in writing. So I would write out Tim colon, hey, inner truth, are you there? Inner truth colon, sure, I'm always here. Tim colon, cool. Can we talk about this issue I'm having at work? Inner truth colon, love to. What's up? What's going on? Right. This kind of thing. And I can write T colon and IT colon, for Tim and inner truth, but you have to write names in front of every line. You can do it on paper. You could do it in a Word document. It doesn't matter, but you have to write the names. And if you do that, if you're not asking any super high stakes questions like, what is my purpose? There's a very high chance that that will just work. Now, when I say it just works, that doesn't mean that you'll believe that it worked. There's also a very high chance that you'll be sitting there writing it out and thinking, this can't possibly be my inner truth. There's no way this thing this guy Tim told me could be working so quickly and easily. It must be harder than this to talk to whatever source it is that you're wanting to talk to. Well, the truth is, it's not harder than that. And it's probably working. And the way to tell whether it's working is it saying stuff that you didn't expect? If it's saying things you did expect, that doesn't mean it's not working, because you and it might agree. But if it's saying stuff you had no idea it was going to say, then it's probably working. Some people believe that they already have a purpose and they're looking for it. That's the more common belief. More than half, very unscientifically, more than half of people believe I have a purpose. I don't know what it is. I would like to know what it is. So therefore, I have to find it. Okay. So that posits that the purpose is a feature, right? So, in the same way that I don't know what the back of my head looks like, but I do know it's there, right? And if I got the right mirrors set up, I'd be able to look at the back of my head and now I would know. That's how some people see purpose. It's a feature. Or like, I don't know what color my spleen is. It has a color. I just haven't seen it, right? So in the same way, people are like, well, I know that my purpose is there. I just don't know what it is. That's information that's already true that's hidden from me. Less than half of people, probably like around 30% or so, maybe a little more, and it varies from country to country, by the way, believe that the purpose is a choice. So I wouldn't say that my career was something that was set in stone and I had no other choice. I decide, do I want to do this? Do I want to do that? Right. And to the extent you believe in free will at all, your career is a choice, just like which school you went to or who you married or stuff like that. You make decisions and those are the results of those decisions. Some people believe that purpose is like that. And those people believe that you're not looking for something that's already there. No one chose my purpose for me. What are you talking about? I need to figure out what would be a good purpose to choose. Now, interestingly, the same methods work for both sets of people. You just have to use different terminology, or they'll be very confused and turned off. But the same techniques work in both situations. Now, let's take the people who believe that they already have a purpose. Was the purpose there when you were born? Was it there before you were born? Or was it a result of you evolving and growing and it grew along with you, right? And similarly, does the purpose change during your lifetime or is it static? And my point of view about all of the questions I just named is the same, which is you should believe whatever you believe about that and don't let anyone try to convince you otherwise. Because if you believe that you had a purpose before you were born and you incarnated and that purpose will not change during this lifetime, that's fine. You're entitled to that belief. And I am in no position to prove you wrong. And if you believe that your purpose is a choice and you can pick any purpose you like and the act of choosing it makes it your purpose, I think you're right. And I'm in no position to try to prove you wrong. And time spent trying to convince people that their beliefs about purpose are incorrect is time wasted. So, living my purpose has had a lot of different effects. Um, One of them is just the very practical effect of me living my purpose required me to find a lot of other people's purposes. And if I were to die right now, that would be my big accomplishment. I would feel like, I mean, I've done a lot of cool stuff in my life, right? I was a commanding officer in the Navy. I've got a wonderful wife and a kid. I've got a math degree from MIT that was fiendishly difficult to get. But really helping thousands of people, me doing it myself and training other people and training people who trained other people who went out and found lots of other people's purposes. That's probably my biggest contribution to society, as well as the technology of how to do that. Um, that's a very direct effect of me living my purpose. But me living my purpose has had other effects. So I've learned as a commanding officer in the Navy and got a lot of great leadership training from the military, the importance of walking the talk and taking my own medicine. And so I'm constantly in the process of honing and evaluating and updating my purpose over time and trying to find bigger, more effective, more challenging, more impactful ways of living that purpose, which means I make myself nervous a lot. And the sources where I get my information about my purpose from make me very nervous with the demands they place on me, which is why I'm going after country purposes, right? Part of me wishes that I were just working with companies all the time, finding their purpose. That would be so much easier than going out to try to find countries that want to find their purpose. No one's doing that. That's a completely new market. I have to go create the idea in people's minds before they would even want to hire me to do it. Huge project, but really interesting, super purposeful. And if I can pull it off, root for me, please. That would be a great contribution to society and a contribution that no one is currently making, as best I know. So, um, for me, I think modeling the courage to keep leaning into bigger and more challenging versions of my purpose has been really inspiring to the people in my community, and they talk about that, and they trust me because I'm transparent and vulnerable about the fact that I don't have all the answers and I fear my purpose just like they fear theirs. And I am trying to figure out how to do it, like just like they're trying to figure out how to do theirs. And people give me a lot of positive feedback about that rather than trying to seem like I have it all handled, which is kind of my default psychologically. Well, people talk about that. They talk about how I address very murky spiritual topics in a very straightforward, logical, step-by-step way. And so the true purpose process is very methodical. And it works like over 90% of the time if the practitioner knows what they're doing. Um, and people who are turned off by very woo-woo spiritual approaches to purpose because they too are logical, skeptical people find themselves able to, and the spiritual people love it too because it gives them all these cool tools that they didn't know they could have for talking to the universe or whatever. But the logical people like it too because the step-by-step methodological way of doing it is very reassuring to their left brains and allows them to stay engaged in something that's taking them. We're not in Kansas anymore, right? We're leaving the reservation, we're going off into these strange realms, but we're going to do it in this easy to understand, simple step-by-step way. So for me, having individuals, even all individuals, living their purpose is insufficient. And the reason is that a lot of the power and structure that we live in that benefits us tremendously and also creates harm is held by systems. And by systems, I mean things like companies, governments, laws, um, the internet. Those are systems. And those systems have a tremendous amount of power. And those systems reflect and act from the consciousness that was used to create them. And so to me, it's insufficient to have evolved, purposeful people in unevolved, unpurposeful systems and declare victory. That doesn't work for me. And I don't think it would work for the world either. So, in addition to having lots and lots of people living their purpose, I feel like we need purposeful companies and purposeful countries and governments and purposeful systems. What's the purpose of the internet? Good question. Is it living that purpose? I'm not sure because I don't know what its purpose is. But challenging business, government, religion, science, art, the media to know and live up to their purposes, I think would create a vastly better world. Now, let's say we would pull that off. What do I imagine that would look like? Well, one thing I imagine it would look like is far more people experiencing far more meaning and fulfillment in their lives, looking forward to going to work, for example. It's a very simple thing that most people do not experience, right? Imagine if everyone rushed to work, eager for the opportunity they're going to get that day in their business, getting their paycheck, living and manifesting their purpose in life. Very simple thing, right? Another one is that we're not busy trying to figure out whom to disenfranchise next. Whom is the next group that we're going to persecute and ostracize and blame for stuff? Instead, trying to figure out how do we make it work for everyone? What's the win win look like in this situation? Alfie Kohn makes a very compelling case in the book No Contest that competition, contrary to what a lot of economists say, does not make systems more efficient. It makes them less efficient. And it actually, just on the face of it, makes all sorts of sense, right? So, what if we were in a win win world instead of a win lose world? What if the forces of masculine and feminine were working in harmony, right? We've been masculine dominant for something like 5 or 10,000 years. We weren't always, before that, we weren't, right? But we have been for a long time. Now, we've achieved a lot during that time. We have a lot to show for it, but we're kind of done with that now. So, what's it look like for not just men and women, but masculine and feminine forces to be operating together in harmony and balance through all of our systems? And I got to tell you, when I envision this, when I visualize it in my mind, like what does heaven on earth look like? To me, it looks like a park with happy people walking around in it. There's technology, there's nature, there's buildings, there's trees, and it's all working together. I'll tell you another of my purpose statements. I told you message is one of the aspects of purpose in my system. Well, my message is the time to create heaven on earth is now. We have been willing to accept excuses from ourselves and others about why it can't be done, and we are out of time, and there is no reason why we cannot create heaven on earth right now.
At the Holo Movement Purpose Lab, over the course of our 2 years of research and counting, we've discovered that purpose isn't a mystery, it's a map. You can find out where you are in the 7-stage process and make it a lot easier to take that very next step. You can go to ourlightnet.org/purpose quiz to take the 2-minute quiz to see where you land and where you're going.